Infrared satellite showing a stray area of low pressure is all we're tracking in week 2 of hurricane season. Today on Tracking the Tropics, a deep dive into just how historically accurate the season forecasts are from NOAA and from Colorado State University. Hey there, folks. Good evening. JB Buno here with you live in your hurricane headquarters on Tracking the Tropics. Great to have with us today CBS 42 meteorologist Dave Nussbaum joining us from Birmingham, Alabama. Dave, great to have you on Tracking the Tropics here for the first time.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here and looking forward to see what we got going on with the show. And we're talking about a busy hurricane season, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And the NOAA season forecast is out, as is Colorado State University's. We're going to be breaking that down here for you and getting out our report cards here in just a moment. But first, I want to let you know we're going to be answering your questions here in the Facebook Live comment section. Hashtag Hey Dave, hashtag Hey JB. You see them here in the bottom left and right-hand corners of your screen. So if you're on Facebook Live, use hashtag Hey Dave, hashtag Hey JB, or hashtag Hey Amanda for meteorologist Amanda Holly, joining us with that very small stray area of low pressure that we're tracking here in your hurricane headquarters. Hey there, Amanda.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Tracking the Tropics. And yeah, week 2 of hurricane season, the official hurricane season anyway, right? And we're tracking a potentially developing area of low pressure really down in the southwestern Caribbean. Not unusual to be tracking an area of low pressure in this location this time of year. But the rest of the tropics, they remain quiet. So looking at the Atlantic basin here, not a whole lot going on, which again is what we expect. But the National Hurricane Center has been keeping an eye on this area for the past couple of days. I will note that they have dropped the chance for development over the next 5 days. It was sitting at 20%. They have dropped it to 10%, and we just got the 2 p.m. update in, and they held it steady. Again, this is in the southwestern Caribbean here near Central America and Colombia, and again, a very low chance of developing over the next 5 days. That means there's not really anything going on right now. They continue to talk about a potential area of low pressure developing in this location and maybe becoming something tropical. But again, chances are very low. They talk about how it's really just going to be a rainmaker, which again, not unusual for this time of year. In fact, it is Central America's rainy season. Looking at satellite and radar, you can see the showers and thunderstorms that are bubbling up in this area, but this is normal. This really isn't associated with the potential development. This is what we would see on any summer day in this location. But over the next 5 days, they talk about how an area of low pressure in this general region could develop, and that's what would have a chance of developing into something tropical. Again, chances are low, just a 10% for this one, but as we head into the next several weeks, we're going to be keeping an eye on this general location for tropical development. Again, not unusual to see areas of low pressure spin off in this general area this time of year, and this is why. The sea surface temperatures, they're at that level, that temperature that is ripe for that tropical development in the low 80s, and that is in the Caribbean Sea. So again, this is why we kind of look to this general area a little closer to home in June for this tropical development. But that's only really the only area that we're keeping an eye on right now. Again, like I said earlier, the rest of the tropics remain quiet. And again, you can see why. As the farther east you go, the water temperatures, they generally get a little bit cooler. But closer to home, we're well into the low 80s in the Gulf of Mexico. Perfect for tropical development if the other conditions are right. And that, at this point, is mainly just in the southwestern Caribbean Sea. Of course, as we get later and later into hurricane season, we're going to be using a lot of Max Defender 8 radar locally here in the Tampa Bay area to track any potential systems. We can really get to see into the storm with our powerful Max Defender 8 radar here in the Tampa Bay region. And we can track those systems that are in the Gulf of Mexico as well off of our coastline here in Tampa. And we'll be using this tool as we go later and later. But right now, thankfully, it remains quiet, and it remains quiet across the rest of the Gulf Coast. Now, if we see a storm develop, whether it's this system or the next named storm, whenever it will develop, and I'm not saying if, because we will see another storm develop this season, it will be named Bill. Of course, we already had Anna form that was northeast of Bermuda several weeks ago before the hurricane season officially began. So the A name already checked off the list, and JB and Dave, we're going to be looking ahead to the rest of the names on the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season. Hopefully we do not get through as many storms as we did last year. year. And I don't think we will, but I do think we're going to get through a good amount of them.
No more Zeta, Theta, Eta, Beta, thank goodness, right, Dave? It makes it a little bit easier when we have names like Danny and Fred and Grace, names that we can pronounce and doesn't get into the Greek alphabet. We have a difficult time as it is with the American alphabet.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Let's hope we don't get to that like we did in 05 and again last year. But we could wait maybe another 15, 20 years. Be fine with me.
Isaias was one that really threw us for a loop last year. Great to have Dave Nussbaum here joining us here from CBS 42 in Birmingham, Alabama here for you folks. And we're going to be getting into a discussion here momentarily. I want to let you know before we do our topic of discussion here today on tracking the tropics. We want to let you know we're going to be taking your questions in a meteorologist Q&A coming up here momentarily. We're taking your question, Facebook Live audience, I'm talking to you. We're taking your questions from Facebook Live, no matter where you're watching from across the United States. We're going to take those questions as long as they use one of the hashtags that we have here on your screen. Let's get to meteorologist Amanda Holly, who just sat back down here with us. And you see here that we have hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Dave, and hashtag Hey JB. So if you'd like to ask your question to one of our meteorologists here, folks, all you have to do is use one of those hashtags, and we'll throw them up here on screen momentarily. But what I want to get into today, our topic of discussion, why we brought in Dave from CBS 42 in Birmingham and why we have Amanda today, is because we make so much of a big deal every year in the spring about those season forecasts that come out from NOAA and from Colorado State University. We always highlight those two to set the tone for what we're going to expect as they kind of get out their crystal ball of mathematics to figure out just how many named storms, how many hurricanes, and how many major hurricanes we're going to have over the course of a hurricane season. But how accurate are they? Very rarely do we, at the end of the year, go back to those preseason forecasts and look to see if they were right or if they weren't right. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to pass things over to Amanda here to kind of set the tone here for us as to what we're doing here to grade NOAA and Colorado State. And we want to let our viewers here know which one is more dependable when it comes to these preseason outlooks.
Yeah, so this was a pretty interesting study that actually JB and I kind of looked at over the past couple of weeks, and we took an average of their forecasts from the past 11 years. So starting in 2010 and going all the way through 2020, we looked at the early season forecasts that Colorado State usually issues in April, and NOAA, the National Hurricane Center, issues in May, late May. And we took an average of those and compared it to the actual number of named storms that formed. And this, what you're looking at right now, is the forecast for this particular hurricane season. But when we looked at the accuracy of the preseason storms, we really just graded it based off of simply how many storms each organization, NOAA and Colorado State University, were off by. We just took an average from the past 11 years, and NOAA, as you can see there on your screen, was off by, on average, 2.47 named storms over the past 11 years. So this was kind of an arbitrary scale that we came up with, but I would say that's generally a pretty good number if you're off by 2.47 named storms. And keep in mind, NOAA, Dave, as you know, they issue a range of they issue a range of forecast named storms, number of named storms. And that's really important because it was hard for us to kind of, integrate that. So we took an average of that range for each year. That's how we came up with that number. So in NOAA's case, they're kind of usually within that average, or within that range that they issue. So that's pretty good. So we went ahead and gave them an A.
And Amanda, I'm gonna just kind of go here to this question. Tony Elliott here asking hashtag AJB, statistically, who has been the most accurate? And that gets us here, right? And I'll send things back over to you and Dave here, this next graphic, because we do have letter grades here based on what we've seen over the past 11 years.
So I just threw up Colorado State University's average error, and that was 3.33 named storms, number of named storms. So we gave them a B, and we based this off of A+ would have been less than 1.9 named storms. A was off by 2 storms, and a B was off by 3 storms. And just looking at the rounding, NOAA got an A, Colorado State got a B, but they were off when compared to each other. They were off by less than 1 named storm just compared to each other. So that's I would say that's pretty good. They did pretty good, and I would be okay with that. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
Well, considering you're making a forecast, in the spring for what's going to happen, obviously that's our job to predict what's going to happen based off of X, Y, and Z. But to get those numbers out there, and I know a lot of people are like, they take this for a grain of salt. Are we really going to see that many storms? And I think the bigger question, or the bigger thing, is what's the trend been here of late? So when everything is active in the tropics from the Pacific and beyond, we kind of look to see what that trend is. And that's where they get those bigger numbers or lower numbers, depending on how above or below average the season's going to be. So if you're 2.5 roughly to 3 named storms off a season, that's not too bad. Of course, we all know they say it only takes one to make a difference for your area, whether it's the East Coast, Gulf of Mexico, or wherever. But nonetheless, though, we are still, I think that's pretty good. I think they're doing pretty good out there. So if they can get that, that's a good start, I would think.
And I know that one thing that always comes up, too, when we talk about this sometimes here on Tracking the Tropics, is I'm looking here. We have TJ, and we have a lot of folks joining us here in the Facebook Live comment section. Again, we'll get to some more of your hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyDave, hashtag HeyAmanda comments coming in here in just a second. But again, we want to focus here on just NOAA and Colorado State University, but what I was getting at is that Colorado State University seems so random, Dave. Colorado doesn't even get hit, really, with hurricanes that are coming, of course, across the Atlantic Ocean, but they have a great team out there at Colorado State University as far as being able to predict it and almost stand toe-to-toe with NOAA.
Yeah, and they have the education and background from schools in the tropics. So this is, something that they understand what obviously tropical meteorology is. They're well versed and educated in how to make those forecasts for those areas. I mean, in reality, you don't have to live on the coast to make a forecast for the coastal areas. You can still live inland. We get all the same access to the data, whether in Colorado or down there in Tampa, Florida. But you still are able to take everything that happens. Because remember, it isn't just what's happening here in the United States and what's happening in the Gulf, the Atlantic, the Caribbean. It's what's going on globally is what they use to make these forecasts. So just because we're located here, that doesn't mean something out in the Pacific isn't influencing, which it does, the forecast we have here in the
So several caveats to this, right? This was basically just a very basic crunching of numbers. I do want to let everyone know that. I'm sure there are some scientists that are watching, and they're probably wondering the methodology here. This was just a very basic average, and there are plenty of deeper dives that we could do. We did one deeper dive, and I will say that last year, 2020, record-breaking season, while both NOAA and CSU forecasted the above-average season, no one really could have predicted the actual number of named storms that we had last year. It was obviously record-breaking. So I went ahead and crunched the numbers, the same methodology, just averaging the number of named storms, number of hurricanes, number of major hurricanes, and then comparing that to the actual number of named storms for the past 10 years, excluding 2020. So this was from 2010 to 2019. And the numbers did improve, because I will say that both of the scores were brought down by 2020, even though they both predicted an above average season. When we're looking at the hard numbers, 30 named storms, neither of them predicted that in the very early season forecast, not the updated forecast. So they got pretty much the same scores here. NOAA got an A and Colorado State got a B, but you can see the numbers have improved a little bit when we exclude 2020, that record-breaking year. But yeah, Colorado State University, they give out quite a bit more information than NOAA does. It's kind of interesting when you go in and actually read, one, their methodology, two, they talk about all of the different factors that they really look at going into the season. Again, they issue theirs in April, which again, as Dave just said, is pretty impressive when we're talking about being off by just on average almost 3 storms, number of named storms here going into the season several months in advance. So pretty interesting to look at. I think that they both do a pretty good job, and Colorado State gives a little bit more information, but these are just looking at the raw numbers.
Yeah, and to go with their be that close. I mean, every year. Now, last year, yeah, the anomaly, even 2005, pretty much an anomaly. There were 28 named storms. They expected above average season. That was not only above average, but significant season, obviously, with the likes of Katrina and Rita and Wilma and a few others out there. So it's to be able to get this is, again, we talk about it's a grain of salt, give you an idea. Basically, they could say it above average or below average, just leave it at that. but instead they kind of do a figure to tell you, hey, average is now 14. And now that we look at the new range there starting from 1991 to 2020, but we could have easily said, we're going to go above 14 this year, we're going to go under 14, and just called it a day. But these guys threw a little more out there and a little bit more, specifics of what we have out there. And there's the numbers you're looking at now for this season. So yeah, above average again. And there's a lot of factors we look at, and there's big forecasters do that, but us local forecasters, we take that all into consideration as well too, considering we live along the coast and we have to go with the brunt of whatever comes our way.
It only takes one storm.
Dave joining us here from CBS 42 Birmingham, Alabama, folks, which saw quite a bit of tropical activity in the 2020 hurricane season. We're going to now really get into the questions coming in here from the Facebook Live comment section. We have a lot of great ones that are coming in. Our digital content producer, Heather Monahan, passing me so many great questions coming in from KLFY's Facebook page, from WKRG's Facebook page. We're going to get to a lot of your questions. So it's not too late. Use hashtag. You see them there on the black stripes on the left and right sides of your screen. Hashtag Hey Dave, hashtag Hey JB, hashtag Hey Amanda. Yeah, Dave gets the idea. He's pointing to it right beneath him there. Let's get to this one here for hashtag Hey Amanda from James here. Doesn't NOAA recalibrate their average storm predictions every 10 years on the data of that time period?
So it's a great question, James, and Dave just kind of alluded to this actually. Yes, every 10 years, the average, the climatological average gets updated. And that's because when we talk about the normal, if temperatures are above normal or below normal, or number of hurricanes are above normal, below normal, that's based on the past 30 years, but it only gets updated every new decade. So we just entered a new decade here in 2021, and we got an updated average from what is it? Oh gosh, now you're going to make me do math here. It's going to be 1990.
We should have brought our calculator for this episode. With all the numbers we're crunching, if we just had a calculator here, it would have been very handy.
So we go through the past 30 years. So it would be through the teens of the 2000s, the single digits of the thousands. 90, yeah, 90. So it's from 90 all the way up to 2019. 2020, do they include 2020?
Yeah, 2020 is included.
2020 is included, right, because we got all the way through 2020, and then they just updated the averages this year. Before that, prior to that, it was from 80 to 2010. And that was the 30-year average that we were going off of. Now, we're going off the new set of averages. So yes, to answer your question simply, yes.
Any question that has... oh, no, I'm sorry, Dave. Go right ahead.
As then, obviously, the number went up. It was 12.
Yes.
Now it's up to 14. So we've obviously had, especially in the last 10 years, many, many more storms out there, part of that cycle we've talked about before. And we're in that active cycle now.
Yeah, and also, there are many things that kind of increase this average, right? One of the big thing is storm detection. Back in the 80s, storm detection wasn't as great as it is now. So we're able to detect the storms, the fish storms that we call them, that don't impact anybody, and that may not have even impacted ships back then that could have detected them and noted them. Now we have satellites that can scan the entire Atlantic basin from, initial development. Even if they stay very, very weak, we can detect those. So sometimes those get names that otherwise wouldn't have gotten names.
And we have a lot of questions coming in here. And any question that comes in where Amanda Holly is doing math on the top of her head, it's usually a pretty good question from our social media audience here. How about one for hashtag Hey Dave from Daryl Davis, KLFY's Facebook page. Shout out to the folks there in Lafayette, Louisiana. Hashtag Hey Dave. Are water temperatures expected to rise higher, or is this average temperature for the duration of the season?
Well, yeah, I mean, right now, I think, Amanda, you just showed them. What were they, 81 there off the coast of Louisiana, I think, at this point. So we'll continue seeing those get pretty high. Now, I remember in years past, I worked in Louisiana, so Lafayette, for those watching there, have some extended family down there. We had water temperatures back, I think it was in 2005, when we had the Katrina and Rita that really impacted Louisiana. It was about 90 degrees there in the central part of the Gulf of Mexico, right where the loop current comes in there. there from the Caribbean. And when Katrina, which was a weak hurricane at that point, hit that, just immediately intensified there up to a Category 5, and obviously made its way on into the New Orleans area. Was able to cover that storm and be in the middle of that one, which was not one I'd ever want to go through again. But those water temperatures have really not been that hot since. It was just one of those anomalies that year. Last year, the water temperatures actually were the highest down right there between Cuba and over toward the, say, Yucatan Peninsula area there. Those were in the upper 80s. And that's why a number of those storms late in the season were able to get to a Cat 4, Cat 5 status down there. And we got the cooler waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Fortunately, this winter was a little bit colder than the winter before, so those water temperatures are a little bit slower to warm up as we head into this season so far. So we're sitting there 80, 81 from roughly over toward Corpus Christi through Louisiana coast back over toward the Texas coast or the Florida coastline. So that's warm enough. We know 80 degrees is the minimum you need for a tropical system to sustain itself. And we have that currently, as you see on the map there, just about everywhere except maybe off the Carolina coastline. So, yeah, we'll see those temperatures that kind of fluctuate a little bit different closer to home because we're impacted more by those cold blasts and fronts like we had this past winter. But I suspect here in the next few months, we'll get those mid and upper 80s once again in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, so these are temperatures right now, the current temperatures being sampled that you're seeing on your screen, and these temperatures will get warmer as we head into the later summer months and early fall. We're going to try to...
And there's a lag, though. I mean, that's one thing to point out. They're not just this warm and then they stay that way.
Right.
Obviously, they fluctuate down in the
Correct.
winter, and then by August, September, that's when the warmest water temperatures usually pop up.
We have about another 5 or so minutes here, folks, on Tracking the Tropics, so we're going to try to really get to as many of these questions as possible. The problem, of course, is that we've had so many great questions coming in, questions that we could dedicate entire episodes to.
And we may.
And right.
We will take these ideas and talk about them in the future.
Well, this question, we see some from time to time. Tatiana joining us from WKRG's Facebook page in Mobile, Alabama. Hashtag, hey, Amanda, is there such a thing as man-made storms? This is a question that is simple but not so simple, all rolled into one.
So, simple answer, no, not hurricanes. Hurricanes form, and basically the basic general idea for hurricanes tropical systems are just to basically redistribute the energy from the warmer tropics all the way back to the north, and just kind of keeping a balance of the energy of our tropical areas, which is kind of interesting. So that happens on a very natural scale, not man-made.
Let's get to this next one here from Michael here, KLFY's Facebook page in Lafayette, Louisiana. Hashtag KJB. What major factors impact a hurricane season's intensity? This question from Michael, Dave, is right on brand with our topic of discussion today.
Yeah, it is. It's the water temperatures make a big difference out there too. You're talking wind shear also will help out. Now, we're not expecting a lot of wind shear this year either, so that means we should have more storms being able to develop. Remember, wind shear we like. That's what rips the storms apart. You have that what's occurring during an El Nino type setup in the Pacific Ocean, the unusual warming of the waters out there. Well, we're not El Nino, and then when you have almost no wind shear, you have a La Nina, which was last year, and that's where we had a lot more of those storms, obviously 30 named storms develop out there. This year it's in between, so we still don't have a lot of wind shear, so any storms that do start developing here as the season progresses, unfortunately, that will be allowing them to develop. As long as those water temperatures are really, really warm, that's going to be fuel, just like gas is for an engine. That's the fuel for those storms.
How about shout out for Raleigh, North Carolina, WNCN's Hayden Henny joining us from their Facebook Live comment section. Hashtag, hey, Amanda, how strong does the hurricane be to have a storm surge start coming in? We just moved 15 minutes from the beach in Venice, and saw where we are in a zone where the storm surge could be coming in towards us, but didn't specify how strong it would have to be.
It's a great question, Hayden. I'll tell you, last year here in the Tampa Bay area, we were only impacted by one storm. And it wasn't a strong storm, but we had storm surge. So Ada was sitting off of our coastline, just off the west coast of Florida here. And it was briefly a Category 1 off of our coastline, but I'm talking about the eye. The center of the storm was offshore, so we didn't get a direct hit from this system, but it was positioned perfectly so that the winds were pushing all of that water toward us here in the Tampa Bay area. And I'll tell you, my in-laws, they live on the water, and they experienced about 3 feet of storm surge, maybe a little bit more. And this was a strong tropical storm, weak Category 1. So it doesn't take much. It really depends on the placement and the wind direction. And if those winds are pushing toward the coastline, they're going to push the water with it, and that's what's going to help to rise the storm surge. So it doesn't take a lot. It depends on the size of the storm, the physical size, but also the stronger the winds are going to push more water in, just by a general rule. But it doesn't always take a very strong system to have storm surge.
Dave, we're going to throw this one your way because you're closer to this location where Brittany Perez is joining us from KLFY. Hashtag Hey Amanda. Will South Louisiana be worse this year with flooding? Coming from an animal rescuer, I tried to stay behind to help. Last year was tough.
Yeah, I mean, they've already had record flooding in Louisiana already. Had nothing to do with the tropics so far this year, too. So same thing applies, just like it did last year, too. You get one of those big hurricanes. Again, just kind of go back to the last question, it all depends where the storm makes landfall on that coast. But the Gulf of Mexico is, once the water starts being pushed up in there, it has to go somewhere. Unlike the Atlantic, it can go up the East Coast and go out to sea. But in the Atlantic, or in the Gulf, it's stuck in there. So if it does make an area where you're on the dirty side or the wet side of the storm, the right side of it, you're going to get that bigger push. Hopefully storms did not impact Louisiana as they got hit by 5 last year and in the cone 8 times. But nonetheless, though, I would be prepared for any storm that comes in. Definitely will deal with some storm surge coastal flooding.
We're going to throw this one right back to you. It's this one coming from Jeremy Murphy, Dave, from KARK in Arkansas. Hashtag Hey Dave. Any idea what the week of June 21st in the Gulf Coast will be like for storms? I know it's a little bit early. And Jeremy, you are not alone if you're visiting the Gulf Coast this time of year, because just a few hours south of where Dave is in Birmingham, some of the most beautiful beaches you will find.
Yeah, I mean, so at this point, I mean, you're going to see the sea breeze kick up the storms every day. So you're going to see showers and thunderstorms out there. Whether or not they're a tropical system or not, too early to say. We are watching a couple features the models have been hinting at, and I look for trends when I'm forecasting in the tropics, especially in June, July, and August when things start getting heated up. And they're showing a trend of maybe something trying to develop in the western part of the Gulf of Mexico close to that time frame. I get too early to say if it is going to develop or where it's going to go, but I'd be prepared for tropical downpours every day. At JB, you know, you've been down there in Mobile. It's like 12 noon every day. Here comes that sea breeze. Here comes those thunderstorms out there, some downpours. And then the sun comes back out a little bit while after.
Yeah, you could set your watch to it each and every day, especially Mobile, Pensacola, Panama City Beach, Destin, that area of the northern Gulf Coast. It's pretty much like clockwork each and every day. Yep. Rankum from KVEO, I think that's Brownsville, Texas, southern Texas, joining us. Hashtag Hey Amanda. Second storm in the Gulf next week, Amanda. We have the graphic pulled up here for it.
Not surprised it's coming from that general area either, because as Dave just mentioned, several of the models that we look at, the longer range forecast models, are hinting at potential tropical development about 10 to 14 days from now, somewhere in maybe the western Gulf. It is way too far out, as Dave just said, to talk about where anything would go, if anything will even develop. This time of year, we kind of expect at the end of the longer range models, as far as they go out, for them to show something, because that's just kind of how they operate. But again, as I mentioned about 30 minutes ago now, this is the general area that we would be looking at, and we could see a potential area of low pressure spinoff from this general location. But again, too early to say. We will be watching it, and of course tune in next Wednesday and maybe we'll have a better idea.
Yeah, every Wednesday, everybody, 2 o'clock Eastern time, 1 o'clock Central. We're going to get to 2 more questions here coming in from the Facebook Live comment section. Nicole here from KLFY, getting a lot of great questions from the Lafayette, Louisiana region here today. Yeah, oh yeah, they are tuned in, and they come back every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Central for Tracking the Tropics. Hashtag HJB, do you think they will change the hurricane start date from June to May. How about we bring in both of our two? I'm not a meteorologist. We'll bring in our two meteorologists here today to answer that question here briefly.
Certainly been talked about. It was a discussion a couple months ago from the National Hurricane Center about bumping up the start of hurricane season in the Atlantic from June 1st to potentially May 15th. So caveat to that, the Pacific hurricane season starts May 15th. So the hurricane watchers, the meteorologists, from the National Hurricane Center, they're already back in the National Hurricane Center May 15th. And they talked about it because over the past 7 years now, we've had a preseason storm develop, which we, again, did this year. This was the 7th consecutive year where we had a storm name before June 1st. So it's talked about, but for now, what they've decided is they're just going to start issuing outlooks for the Atlantic. So they're just going to start talking about if there's anything that they're watching. They're going to push those out. Of course, they do that several times a day. And that way, if they're watching anything, they can push it out in those outlooks. But right now, they have not decided to bump up the hurricane season.
Any thoughts on that,
And
Dave?
the odds of one happening, I mean, granted, we have one on average every 7 years. So it's not like we're expecting, if we're having 3 or 4 for some reason in May, that might change it. But since it's just that rare occasion, and most of them along the East Coast, most of them are out in the middle of the Atlantic as well.
And a lot of them, even if they get closer to us, they're just really rainmakers. They're not necessarily a big wind threat because we don't have all those ingredients to have a major system that early in the season.
The final... Oh, no, Dave, go ahead.
No, so they're still battling some of those cold fronts by mid-May. Still work their way down to the Gulf Coast at that point. But once you get to June, it's harder for them to get down to the I-10 corridor. Then it's like the I-20 corridor. Then really, we don't get fronts down the Gulf at all, or the Gulf Coast for that matter, once we get past June.
The final question that we're going to take here is a bit serendipitous because we're talking, of course, about judging the show topic today for Tracking the Tropics was judging the accuracy of NOAA and CSU's season forecast, season outlooks, if you will. So the final question we're going to pose to our two meteorologists are from Kim Parsons, WKRG in Alabama, #JB, how many storms do you think we will get this season? I don't know who wants to go first here, but this is now when we start to look at what we've seen thus far and some of the work that's been done by not just NOAA but also by Colorado State University to inform our meteorologists here and in our company. And Dave, why don't you start? And do you have any sort of advanced prediction for the 2021 hurricane season?
You know, we're looking at the same thing. And there's experts, if you will, put out there as well, too. I agree. It's definitely going to be above average. And even some of the longer term things I've now looked at heading into the fall now, and Amanda, you probably look the same here, does hint at maybe closer to a La Nina forming. So if that trend continues, that means like last year, we could see an uptick later in the season. Usually August 15th, September 15th, that's your go time here for a lot of storms. Last year was more kind of September 15th to October 15th, a little bit later. I went through Hurricane Zeta last year, which is right before Halloween. And that was a Cat 3 as they upgraded it too. So those numbers closer to 18 to 20, I think that'd be the range I would go with for this season here. Again, like last year, I think a lot of them will start off as tropical storms, weak ones out there, and then once we get to that meat or heart of the season, I think that's when we'll start seeing more of those hurricanes, and unfortunately, some of those major hurricanes, especially down there in the Caribbean. Amanda?
I completely agree. Again, you said it, Dave. We all kind of look at the same things heading into hurricane season. I will say that a meteorologist is different than a climatologist. Climatologists look at several different factors. They look at longer-term forecasts, basically. They look at longer-term models, and they are specialized in a little bit different things, but we all basically look at those 4 major factors. Again, the wind shear, and that is affected by El Nino, La Nina, and so neutral, which is what we're in right now. But Dave, like you said, we are potentially forecasted to go back into a La Nina, which again is what we were in last year. And remember, La Nina helps weaken our winds vertically in the atmosphere here in the Atlantic. Even though it's a system that's over in the Pacific, it gives us weaker winds here in the Atlantic, and that allows those storms to organize more. So again, if that happens later in the season, we would see an uptick later in the season. And you may go over the next couple of months, and we've only only seen a couple of named storms form, and then later in the season, we'll start to check them off a little bit faster. Don't be surprised if that happens. But yeah, closer to that top end range, I do think that it is going to be an above average season again. So, you know, average being 14 named storms. So I do think that we'll see at least a couple more than that, if not several more. But one final note, I do want to mention that NOAA explicitly stated in their forecast this year that they do not expect the record-breaking season that we had last year. So that's good news, something to hold on to.
Very,
we don't want that.
Very, very fortunate that that little nugget was included with the season forecast from NOAA. Really like to thank all the commenters that joined us in the Facebook Live and social media comment section, all the hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyAmanda, hashtag HeyDave comments that we had here on this Week 2 edition of Tracking the Tropics. Most of all, would like to really thank Dave Nussbaum joining us here from CBS 42 in Birmingham, Alabama. For our Birmingham, Alabama viewers, you can watch him on WIAT CBS 42, part of the great weather team that they have over there with Chief Meteorologist Ashley Gann, who's been on with us before here on Tracking the Tropics. Dave, before we let you go, your final thoughts here as we are still very early here in the 2021 hurricane season. What do you want folks to know out there?
Well, now's the thing. We can't say it enough. Be prepared. Have your kits ready. I know a lot of people wait to the last minute to go ahead and do this. And after living in the tropics and in Louisiana for the last 17 years, the thing is, get prepared now. Have your kit ready. Have your plan ready. Know where, if you have to evacuate, where to go, what roads will be closed. Be prepared for flooding along the coastal areas as well, too. Even if you're going inland, have a place you're going to be where you can make sure you get to and away from that storm as well. It's never too early to be prepared with that. Keep it tuned, of course, to here, as well as my station, CBS 42. We have weather updates, of course, all the time. You can find me at meteorologist Dave Nussbaum on Facebook, Dave_Nussbaum on Twitter. And again, just get ready. Even inland, up here in Birmingham, we have to watch out for tornadoes and flash flooding issues. So if you don't live along the coast, but a storm can come up to your area, you still can be fairly impacted by this. So, you know, Atlanta, Birmingham, Jackson, Mississippi, even up to Nashville, Tennessee, Charlotte, Raleigh area, well inland areas, you also need to be prepared anytime during hurricane season.
Dave, a big thanks to you for joining us here on Tracking the Tropics every Wednesday, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central on this website, on this app, or this social media platform that you're watching right now. We are live not just weekly on Wednesday afternoons, but also we have our storm coverage streams when we're tracking something that is more imminent as far as getting closer to the coverage area that we focus on, the southeastern United States. We are live for you. Doesn't matter the time of day. Doesn't matter if it's a weekend. We are live here for you as that storm gets a little bit closer to perhaps where you are. We'll be tapping into more meteorologists over the course of the 2021 hurricane season, meteorologists that work really hard and know their area better than anyone, meteorologists such as Dave. Of course, Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Amanda Holly here with us here in Tampa, Florida. I'm JB Buno, folks. We'll see you next Wednesday or sooner if something pops up, perhaps keeping an eye there on that area of low pressure there in the Caribbean. We'll be keeping an eye on that, but if not, we'll see you next Wednesday, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central on Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.